Flying high in the air is the Xtreme Skyflyer at Kings Island. That's a ride that's been around for a while, but it doesn't really come to top of mind. But it sure does have a story behind it. Hello, everybody. Alongside Don Helbig, I'm Ryan Sir, and this is Tower Topics.
Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans because that's who we are and that's who we care about.
Awesome. So, Don, without further ado, we actually do have a guest on this one because we can't just cover Xtreme Skyflyer on our own. We've got Mark Rosenzweig. So, Mark is currently with 3DX Scenic. And for those of you checking out the Attractions Group podcast, there's an episode out by the time you listen to this with him and the other people involved in that company. But he worked for Ride Entertainment, was the managing director of the Skycoaster section of Ride Entertainment. So he was the one that was responsible for bringing Skycoaster to Kings Island for all intents and purposes. So let's welcome Mark to the show. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. You're just another fortunate person in the attractions industry to have grown into this great industry that we all know and love. From a very young age, growing up in Long Island, New York, I visited Coney Island and Adventureland and Nunley's Amusement Park in Baldwin. And that basically pushed me towards wanting a career in this industry. And I have background in park operations, and I actually got started in the industry back in 1998 working at Michigan's Adventure, which was before Cedar Fair had purchased the park. So I worked for the Jordan family for the summer of 98, was on the team that opened Shivering Timber. So that was very exciting. And then moved back to New York, and for a period of about 7 years, worked in sales and marketing for Zamperla Inc., which is their United States or North American based operation, which is in Parsippany, New Jersey, about a half hour west of New York City. And then later in 2007, moved down to Baltimore, Maryland, where I joined the Ride Entertainment Group. And wore a lot of hats there. It was a great experience. Spent 13 years in the Charm City. I'm sure neither of you are Ravens fans, so we'll just not talk about football today. And then, so COVID kind of, flipped a lot of people in different directions, and I was one of those. And I was fortunate enough to have found 3DX Scenic here in Cincinnati. Came out for an interview, knew the area pretty well just from visiting Kings Island and other attractions in the area. And the rest is kind of history. So I joined the team in sales, and within 4 years actually became part owner of the company. And that's where I am right now.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting success story, So you were in sales, specifically selling different rides, Zamperla and the many things that Ride Entertainment does. And then you went to sales at 3DX. Can you talk about how that's different? I imagine that a lot of your clientele is probably overlapping, but 3DX probably has a little bit of a wider net, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's. I was brought in from my attractions industry background, so to kind of increase the number of what we would call external projects, because 3DX was doing a lot of live entertainment, scenic projects, which are still great. They're kind of the DNA or where 3DX is from. It's based out of theater. So really, it was kind of more trying to find the counterpart to the ride operations director, someone in entertainment or design, corporate design, that kind of thing. Because we do a lot of experiential projects here for experiential marketing firms, and it's not very different from, say, doing a thematic package that finishes out a roller coaster or a dark ride or a flat ride section. It really kind of rounds it out. So more or less the same general clients, just different individual people at those specific parks and attractions.
All right. Mark, talk a little bit more about Ride Entertainment and what they do, like how our audience might be familiar with them.
Yeah, I mean, Ride Entertainment's one of the most diversified companies in the attractions industry. And again, I was just so fortunate to have spent 13 years there. I got to meet a lot of, they have a sales division, so they represent several ride manufacturers, but then they also have a park operations division, which is very cool. They have many small park operations throughout the city of New York, like the Sea Glass Carousel and Fantasy Forest and Flushing Meadows Park and the Forest Park Carousel, to name a few. So it was a very cool place to be. And then in addition to that, which is kind of why I guess the three of us are sitting here today, one of their core divisions was Skycoaster. And I took a love to that right away because I love operations. I kind of love everything about the Skycoaster model, which we can talk about a little more as we go through today's episode. But it is truly within Skycoaster, it's a subculture within a subculture is the way I described it. Because when you work in a theme park, your friends and family that don't work in theme parks don't understand what you do. They don't understand why are you working 60, 70, 80 hours a week? Why are you doing this stuff? And, and then you tell the stories, and you really need to be around other people that work in the industry that can nod at you and have a laugh while you have a beer and talk about some of our stories. But so it just takes that ride park operations to the next level with regard to, it's not easy. It's a difficult process to go through to become a site controller. And it really is the cream of the crop at every park, and Kings Island is no exception.
So what was your function within Ride Entertainment? You were a salesperson, right? Or were you an operations person?
Yeah, I did a little of everything. So I did some ride sales projects. One of my earliest was the S&S El Loco coaster when we were representing S&S at Indiana Beach, which I think is called Steel Hog or something like that.
Steel Hog, yeah.
So that was one of the first that I did when I was at Ride Entertainment. But then I kind of moved into they also have a division that does financial partnerships. So like carousel or any kind of upcharge attraction at an amusement park or a zoo or one of those type facilities. Zoos don't always have the budgets to go in and do brand new rides. So the model would be we would finance the whole ride, install it, and then the partnership would be the facility would operate and maintain it, and then there'd be a sharing of revenue, which was a very it was a great model because it worked for both sides. And one of the larger projects that I was involved in when I first came on was the ride package up at the Columbus Zoo that we did back. I think it was called Jungle Jack's Landing when it first opened. So that was a really exciting project and led into many others. But I think where I really found my personal favorite role that I had filled there was as managing director of Skycoaster, because it allowed me to get out, myself and a team of 3 to 5 of us went all around the world to the different Skycoaster sites. And in doing so, we certified site controllers. We met with the operations team. We even offered to meet with in-park services and finance. If there was a question on how could we, how can we better ticket this, because they're all upcharge attractions, and just using the data that we had. And Kings Island is really, for me, top 3, if not maybe the best run Skycoaster in the entire industry, both from operations, but also just a ticketing standpoint. They're one of the only sites that I know of that has a dynamic model where if you show up at the park at open and go right to the ride, it's not unheard of to see $5 flights or $10 flights. And normally these rides come with a $15 to $30 or $40 ticket. And, just to me, the success of the ride is always you need people on it flying. Otherwise, it just looks like it is a very pretty structure, but people are drawn to it when they hear screams and they see people flying on it. So I always loved that Kings Island was, really at the forefront with that.
So Mark, how did the Skyflyer at Kings Island come to be?
Well, I wasn't with the company when that ride went in, but there's some interesting background and little tidbits that I promised Ryan I would bring to this. I had to go kind of spark my memory. There are 2 types of loading platforms that are used on Skycoasters. One is called a hydraulic scissors lift platform, which is what you see at Kings Island and many of the other Cedar Fair parks. And then there's what's called a rolling boarding platform, which is just a set of stairs, and the whole platform rolls on a track. You may have seen that. Trying to think around here. I know in Branson, Missouri, at the track they have that. Most of the smaller sites have that, but Kings Island was one of the very first sites to open with a hydraulic scissors lift. And that was designed to help increase capacity. On average, you would get between 1 and 2 additional flights an hour having that platform, because they could bring the next set of flyers up on the platform as it's raising up, while the existing flyers that have finished their flight are now going to be taken off the flight cables. So you have that quick switch and you can turn the riders around quicker. And also Kings Island was one of the very first double sky coasters. So the model is a 173-foot dual lattice arch. The very first one of those opened in 1994 at Lagoon Park in Salt Lake City. This was the second one that opened here in Mason, Ohio.
That's fascinating. So 173-foot lattice arch, that's the name of the model?
Yes, and that's the height of the arch itself. So I know there's conflicting information out there, but more just to round it off, the launch tower, which is the tower in the back that splits apart that the flyers are winched up to, that measures in right at 150 feet. So your actual drop is somewhere in that 140 to 145 foot range is your actual arc.
I think that I mean, I've seen a bunch of sky coasters like around, you know, being around the industry. I think Kings Island is the best looking. I love that arch design. Yeah. It seems like they might have either gotten away from it or something like that, because Cedar Point and Fun Spot and all those places have like more rigid vertical poles and stuff. But I think it's great looking. But so you mentioned like the model, the business model associated with it is often like where zoos and stuff like that, you would go in and you guys would pay for the ride, they'd maintain it and so on. Is that something that's like in perpetuity, or is it like typically a 10-year agreement and then we'll see what happens after that? Like,
yeah, they're all different. It's all structured deal by deal. So, I mean, it's really based upon what the facility's goals are. But the Kings Island Skycoaster was purchased outright by Paramount Parks back in and it opened in, I believe, late April of 1995 was the opening date. And not to go off on a tangent, but there's one other interesting tidbit that a lot of the viewers are going to remember is that the original name of Xtreme Skyflyer was actually Drop Zone. And many people don't remember that. And it was just for one season. And then at some point in 1996, after the attraction had changed names to Xtreme Skyflyer, rumors had started popping that a potential drop ride was going to show up on Coney Mall in the summer of 1997, which maybe they switched the site or the ride wasn't ready. But the actual drop zone that we now know, the Intamin Gyro drop, is over in Action Zone, opened in 1999. So just interesting that it opened right next to its former namesake. But
yeah, so just as the history lesson, then I know it's your turn for a question, Don. But for those of you who have no idea what Mark's talking about, because I do remember this, and I thought I was crazy for years. It was called Drop Zone. Then they changed the name to Xtreme Skyflyer. And I don't remember seeing this, but I've heard from everybody that they had a sign over where Antique Autos are now, the old Flight Commander pad, saying New Thrills dropping in 1990. I don't think it was 99 when Drop Tower opened, but they like punted on it or something, or at least changed the location, like you mentioned, Mark. And Don, do you have any information on that? Do you know if they changed the whole project, or was Drop Tower supposed to be there?
Well, originally they were looking to put it into the Coney Mall area, but then as they were evolving and making that area and naming it Action Zone, they decided something like that belonged in Action Zone. So at first, yeah, it was originally just, designated for Coney Mall.
Interesting. Cool.
Awesome. All right, Mark, you go to Kings Island a lot. It seems like I always cross paths with you normally as we're going back behind the Eiffel Tower and that. But when you're there, do you ever look over at the Skyflyer and, just kind of, think about all the involvement that you had with that attraction?
Yeah, it's great memories, and I have a lot of great friends in the park. I work with Dustin Prickett in operations. He's, to me, one of the best operations managers in the industry, and had many great site visits over the years. So it's a phase of a career, right? So I mean, we all kind of evolve and move through. And I still have a lot of friends from those days, and we reminisce about it. But it's I think at Kings Island it fits well. It fits well on the skyline, and I think it's placed really well because of for me, the success of a sky coaster is as much placement as the ride itself. You have some sky coasters that are just in like off the beaten path locations, and when you're swinging, you're not really swinging over anything. When you fly at Kings Island, you're flying out over the Action Zone midway, and on a Saturday there could be 3,000 people down there just milling about, having a blue ice cream, and it just pulls people in. So I mean, really, really masterful. Whoever thought to put it there. I could put other sky coasters, Kennywood's, which is important to mention because Kennywood has the first sky coaster to ever go into a gated park. And there were a lot of doubts amongst those in the industry that why would people pay, at the time, $25, $30 for a day ticket and then pay another $25 to fly a sky coaster? And as it turns out, they were sold out of flights by 4 p.m., 5 p.m. every day. So as soon as that was seen, then the industry just jumped. Every Flags Park, every Cedar Park, not every Cedar Park, but Paramount Park at the time, all 5 of them got sky coasters in quick succession. One other interesting note is that, the sky coasters all have codes. So Kings Island's is OH40. So that's Ohio. And then it was the 40th sky coaster to be fabricated and introduced. So you have Carowinds is NC41. You have King's Dominion was VA42. You have California's Great America was CA43. Canada's Wonderland waited another year. The one that just got removed this past off season, that was OC50 for Ontario, Canada 50. So this is all total nerd talk, but hopefully you guys are appreciating this.
Oh, yeah. I'm on top of it. I love model numbers. Yeah. So do you have a favorite sky coaster?
I tend to go back to Kennywood. It's an older 189-foot single sky coaster. And going back to placement, it is absolutely masterful. Most sky coasters are kind of pushed back. So you have that area where the flyers are swinging out over the midway and engaging with guests and interacting. For Kennywood, I almost feel like you're a performer in a stunt show. You're boarding on that island where there used to be a circus way back in the day and other various variety shows. You're winched up, 180 something feet above, you're essentially right above the carousel. And everyone in the park just turns around and looks up. And then when you hear that 3, 2, 1 fly and pull the ripcord, you take that nosedive, you swing out over the lagoon, and then you're actually out over the racer. And for Kennywood's not a large park, but they put one of the largest sky coasters, and certainly groundbreaking. I mean, part of it is the placement, part of it is the risk they took because there's no guarantee. And, that led to so many more installations, including that's why Lake Compounce got a sky coaster when Kennywood took over that park in the late 90s. It was on their opening day roster. So I would say that one. I also like Royal Gorge in Colorado. Is only 100-footer. If you've never seen it, definitely Google it, or I'm sure there are YouTube videos. It's positioned right on the edge of the gorge. So when you swing out over the edge, you're looking 1,200 feet down at the Arkansas River, and you're basically flying with hawks and eagles. It is, one of those Zen moments that absolutely has to be experienced.
Yeah,
I'm with you, Mark, on that with Kennywood's, being my favorite of all of them that I've experienced just because of the location. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I really like Kings Island, and it's just behind the one at Kennywood, I think, because of location as well.
And you'll note next time if you fly or you have way to get in the loading area or the flight suit area, the team, I don't know if it's still there, but for a while it was, they actually spelled out 3, 2, 1 fly in rocks right by I guess that would be the east side of the arch. So the side of the arch closer to Banshee.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. So let me put this up there. Is it Willow Gorge? Is that what we decided this was?
Royal Gorge.
Royal Gorge. Okay, cool. Yeah. Here, let me pull up the correct thing. But I'd actually heard of this before, and you talk about impressive. It goes out over the gorge. There's a bunch of attractions like that puts you in like really weird vicarious situations, like the glass floor and the Willis Tower and stuff like that. But that one I feel like is like kind of particularly impressive. And give me just a second and I'll get that pulled up because I feel like that's something that needs to be seen,
Yeah. And of course we can't forget about the 2 ginormous sky coasters in Orlando at Fun Spot America and Kissimmee, especially. That's still the world's tallest at 300 feet. And that's just, yeah, there's a great photo right there. That might actually be my photo.
Are we going to get a copyright strike on YouTube now?
Yeah, it's really mind blowing. And, Royal Gorge is a nature park, but they've managed to blend in attractions in a way that doesn't take away from that aspect of the nature. And you know, it's an easy 2.5 hour drive from Denver. So, you know, I definitely encourage anyone that goes out there to check it out. Just walking across that suspension bridge, I think it's either the world's highest suspension bridge or at least highest in America. And then they have a zip line going across the gorge. They've got a gondola going across, and of course you could fly as well. So it's really, really bold, really cool, and a great family atmosphere.
Absolutely. That's cool. Besides, I mean, we already asked about your favorite Skycoaster. What's your favorite ride besides the Skycoaster?
Oh, favorite ride. It's tough. You know, I mean, I stopped, I think way back in the day, I was counting how many coasters I'd ride. And I think when my coaster count, I don't know if I lost the login information, so I lost count of that. But I go back to for wood coaster. For old school, I would go Phoenix at Knoebels. For new school, I go Voyage at Holiday World. I mean, just the engineering in that thing, and you know, I can't necessarily marathon it, but you know, especially this year, we were fortunate enough to take a few laps on it during the Good Gravy Media Day when we were all out there, and the work they've done this year, you know, it's just spectacular. Steel coaster, I'm somewhere between Jurassic World Velocicoaster at Islands of Adventure and Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. Although at Cedar Point, I'm is it Maverick or Steel Vengeance? It's one of those two that, you know, they're just world-class rides. Then I also have a soft spot for Helix over at Liseberg in Sweden as well. That's for my money the best mock rides launch coaster.
Yeah, Mark, for someone that looks at Skyflyer and Skycoasters and they're kind of hesitant, afraid to experience it, what would you say to them to get them to give it a try?
Well, I bribed my youngest, and that worked, and we were on the Blackpool South Pier. But no, I think for Skycoaster, it really is what you want it to be, right? So for one, I always suggest go in a group of 3 because that camaraderie really, everyone's going to be scared, everyone's going to be breathing heavy, but you know, you can kind of scream and joke, and you know, it's really the winch up is really the part that scares most people. The actual drop is over so quickly. And, you know, the actual free fall on a Skycoaster is not really more than 10 feet before the flight cable grabs. So once you start arcing and you take that first swing, that's when it's like a sigh of relief that the worst part is over. And now we can scream and yell and laugh. And but definitely go with 2 of your best friends or 2 of your family members. That's number one. The other one, too, is that, you know, you can pull. I mean, you can ask the park. I don't know, you know, standard operating procedures at each park. But if you just want to take a half flight, that's perfectly okay. You know, the ride is completely manually operated, and the flyers pull the ripcord. So, I mean, you know, if you really don't want to go 150 feet in the air, just say, hey, stop me halfway for my first time. I want to see if I like it, and then I'll come back and ride it again. So,
yeah, that's interesting. So technically, I'm not recommending this, but could a rider pull the ripcord while they're being towed up? I've always wondered that. I guess you would know.
Well, that's part of the most comprehensive operations manual in the industry, which I don't have it memorized anymore, but I did. I mean, there's backups upon backups upon backups. So that's why the flight crew is instructed to stand in certain places. So if you're standing back by the work stand, which is where the landing unit is, which is that pole that they raise up that you grab the loop and pull the loop out. If the flyer pulls the ripcord prematurely, they're just going to take the same flight path. So they're going to be out of that flight path. So that's part of the operating procedure. You know, I can run down other, you know, the cables are rated to way more weight than they would ever. You know, technically a flight is limited to 850 pounds combined. You can more or less fly a Ford F-150 on those cables if you wanted to. I'm not saying the structure would support that, but it's the protocol put in, you know, the training they're on a flight crew like Kings Island has, because they have a hydraulic scissors lift, they have expediters, they have assistant controllers, and flight suit person. Those are the 4 positions. You have to go through 8 hours of training in each position. And then once you have gone through those hours, then we have Skycoaster would send a representative to your site to observe these new employees, watch them operate the ride, and then administer a written test. And you have to get a 90 out of 100. And it's not an easy test. It's multiple choice questions, but they're taken out of the manual. It's very rigid and you have to get a 90 out of 100. And then you are issued a site controller card. And in order for a Skycoaster to operate, you need to have a site controller at the ride at all times. So it's a very, it's a rigid system, but it's that way because it has to be. The only thing automated on the Skycoaster, there are proximity switches on the winch drum that sense the absence or presence of the launch cable. So it will stop the launch cable during winch up and stop it as it's coming back down before you engage the next set of flyers. But otherwise, everything is pretty much manual.
Old school, yeah. So I guess one last question, and this is a good question for you. So there's a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people that listen to this podcast and the Attractions Group podcast, or maybe younger people that want to get into the industry. 99.3% of them want to be roller coaster engineers. But for that 0.7% that was like me, that wanted to go into marketing, for example, you're a perfect example of an avenue you can go. What advice would you have for the people that may be interested in ride sales or having a similar position to yours?
Number one, as a broad comment, is get your hands dirty. That's number one. Never be above anything. You can't be an engineer until you're in a shop fabricating something. That's very important to me. You have to know what it's like to put things together before you could sit down at a desk and draw things, because it's only going to enhance your knowledge, and it's also going to make you more empathetic and understand. But I always suggest to people to look into the ambassador program at the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions for their annual expo in Orlando. That's a great way to get in and meet like-minded people. I also encourage people to get a job at a park. You know, whether you live here in Cincinnati, Kings Island is a I can't say from personal experience, but you know, it has such a good culture amongst the seasonal staff. I mean, some of the best ride operators that I've ever come across. You know, always saying have fun when they check your restraint. You know, very much into it. It feels like to me that 9 out of 10 ride operators at Kings Island are enthusiasts, or maybe maybe that's overstatement, but it's. I feel that way, and it goes a long way. I think the guests take a lot from that. So getting a seasonal job, and even if it's sweeping the midways, if it's park services, just get in there and always be learning, always be open. If someone says, hey, I got an opening here, or, work a game. Yeah, work that game, because it's going to help build your people skills, making eye contact with people, confidence, and just taking step by step. And you're not going to be a roller coaster engineer tomorrow, but if you take those steps and you go to the right school, take the right program, the sky is really the limit. There's going to be room for the next generation, because none of us are going to be around forever. And I'm very encouraged by how inclusive and diverse the industry has gotten over the last 20 years, because it was very white male when I came into the industry, and I'm very encouraged by how diverse and all that. So I think that bodes very well for the attractions industry in America and on a global scale as well.
Okay. Well, Mark, we appreciate you coming by. This is, we've been talking about this for weeks, and I've always been very interested in 3DX. We're going to cover that. Don't worry. If you're listening to this podcast, we've already covered it on the Attractions Group podcast. But things like ride entertainment, Skycoaster, stuff like that, that's really kind of getting into the gritty of the industry. That's like stuff where you know your stuff if you know what ride entertainment is, or a lot of people know what B&M is, even the average person. Heck, Cedar Point sells shirts that say RMC on them. But this kind of stuff is really, really fascinating, and it's such an important part of the industry. So love to have it. You'll definitely have to come back sometime. We'll share some more stories about Kings Island and different parks and your different experiences.
Yeah, I've got a lot of stories. I just have to dig them up from inside my brain. So it's
we'll provoke them.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Mark. Well, a very special thank you to Mark for joining us today. So let's move on to the listener question. So our first listener question is from Special Vehicle Team, which makes me think I'm being watched right now, to be honest with you. It said, what's the best way to go about getting KI to consider replacing Boo Blasters with a new and improved dark theme ride? It's more ran its course and should not be on the top list to replace. It should be on the top list to replace. Okay. Something with the feel of Disney's Haunted Mansion, which would be family friendly. So you always said this is a very good question, because you said if you like a ride, people vote with their feet. So if you want to make sure that the scrambler's around for years, make sure you ride the scrambler every visit. How do you do the opposite? Or should we tell special vehicle team not to ride?
Well, I mean, he's asking what's the best way to go about getting it replaced, and Blue Blasters is still a popular attraction, so it does does perform well in that regard. So yeah, I mean, I think it would have to be voting with your feet. That the ridership would have to maybe dramatically decline or something before they would consider doing something different in there. I know there's been different ideas kicked around and all that, but when you're looking at different budgets and you're adding either new roller coasters, you added new restaurants, you've done some other things over the years, and that just kind of is one of those attractions. It needs some attention, but it's still not the priority. But yeah, I think that would be the thing. As long as the ridership is strong in that, there's not that need that we have to update this.
I think there's a bias though, because I think that it gets a lot of ridership because it is the only dark ride. If it was the other dark ride, nobody would ride it. But that's one of the few rides where you can get air conditioning, you can get out of the sun and stuff. So I think that there's definitely a skew as a result of it. But I think that there's an appetite for a new ride. But I've said this a million times in this podcast, and special vehicle team, I want to know if you agree or not, but I don't want Boo Blasters replaced until they're ready to do it for real. I don't want Boo Blasters, but it's Charlie Brown. I want it so it's cool and immersive. You mentioned like a Haunted Mansion kind of thing. Like, let's be honest, they're never going to put in an attraction that's as good as Haunted Mansion. But a Haunted Mansion, Phantom Theater is a perfect example. That wasn't Haunted Mansion, and nobody's dumb enough to think that it's as good or better than Haunted Mansion. But, for a seasonal park, that was just absolutely incredible. But I'd rather wait, even if I have to wait another 5 years, to see it replaced with something that's really good instead of just another skin and more stuff.
Yeah, something that's really, like you said, good. It's immersive. It can be, that attraction that is, new for that year, that is going to help you drive attendance too.
Absolutely. Yep. And dark rides, I believe, do drive attendance. I don't have the numbers to back that up, but it's got to be, there's a reason why people add them. They're expensive to maintain. If they didn't drive attendance and drive it relatively well, then no park would have it. Cool. Don, what's the next listener question?
It's from Liz. Why was the Park Ambassador program disbanded?
I guess the official answer is we don't know. We're assuming it's budgetary. I mean, I don't know what more to add to that. I thought there was a lot of value to it. I think that the problem is that on paper, it looked like it was a bunch of people walking around the park and doing whatever. But now we're into the core season, Kings Island's daily. And if something were to go wrong, they're going to wish they had them.
I have had a number of guests come up to me during my visits this year telling me that they miss the ambassador program. They did provide a great service for guests. But when you look at the situation, that we saw last year, there were a lot of budget cuts, and there's still some different cuts going into this season, and this isn't something the park probably wanted to do. But if the mandate is trim X amount of dollars off your your operating expenses, you start looking where to make those cuts. Well, you can't cut staffing on the rides, can't cut staffing at the merchandise locations, you can't cut staffing at the food locations, can't cut staffing at park services. I mean, it just comes down to you got to make some hard decisions sometimes.
I agree, and to be clear, I don't want to imply at all that the park said those people are worthless and they got rid of it. The reality is the park can chug along without them. And you mentioned a lot of things like they did cut staffing in rides last year, and they had to rotate kiddie rides, and it was a really bad experience. I think that it was a net negative for them. I'm not sure if park services was cut. I've heard it was this year, but when it comes down to we used to have 4 people that were sweeping and changing the trash in Planet Snoopy, but with 4 people we could probably do Planet Snoopy and Rivertown, and then the quality drops because it's too much work for however many people. So unfortunately, I hate it. I really don't like the fact that they cut the ambassadors, but it might have been a necessary evil, you know, a decision out of their hands. But very, very good question, Liz. All right. I'm Ryan Sir, along with Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.